Picture this, you're a decorated police commander, coming home from a 14-hour shift, groceries in hand, when your neighbor's son blocks your driveway demanding you hand over your food. When you refuse, his mother calls 911, screaming that a dangerous black man is threatening her family, the responding officers, your own team. But here's the twist that'll make your jaw drop. This wasn't just about groceries or racism. This was about $1 million HOA embezzlement scheme, and I was getting too close to the truth. My name is Commander Marcus Thompson, and this is how one grocery run exposed the most corrupt homeowners association. In Atlanta's history, I've been a cop for 23 years. I've seen humanity at its absolute worst: domestic violence calls that haunt your sleep, crime scenes that test your faith in people, corruption that makes you question everything you believed about justice. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in my own neighborhood on that humid Tuesday evening in June. My name is Commander Marcus Thompson, and I run the Criminal Investigations Division for the Atlanta Metropolitan Police. I live in Brookhaven Estates, an upscale subdivision where the houses are pristine, the lawns are manicured, and the homeowners association rules are stricter than most military bases. I bought my house there 5 years ago after my promotion, a symbol that a kid from the projects had finally made it. That Tuesday started like any other. I was wrapping up a complex fraud investigation involving multiple city contractors when my phone buzzed with a text from my wife. "Sarah, can you grab milk and bread on your way home? Emma's making French toast for breakfast tomorrow." Emma's my 8-year-old daughter, and French toast is our weekend tradition that sometimes spills into weekdays. When she gives me those big brown eyes that melt my heart every time. I stopped at Kroger around 8 p.m., grabbing not just milk and bread, but ingredients for a proper dinner: salmon, asparagus, brown rice. Sarah works as a pediatric nurse and had been pulling 12-hour shifts all week. The least I could do was cook. As I pulled into Brookhaven Estates, I noticed something odd. There were more cars than usual parked along the street near the community center, and several residents were gathered in small groups on their front lawns, talking in hushed tones. In 5 years of living here, I'd never seen this kind of activity on a Tuesday night. I turned into my driveway, or tried to. Standing directly in the middle of it was Tyler Morrison, the 19-year-old son of Jonna Morrison, our HOA president. Tyler was about 6'2", athletic build, wearing a Georgia Tech t-shirt and basketball shorts. He didn't move when I honked gently. I rolled down my window. "Hey Tyler, I need to get into my garage." He walked over to my car with this cocky swagger that immediately put me on alert. In my line of work, you learn to read body language like a foreign language. And Tyler screamed entitlement with a side of aggression. "Mr. Thompson," he said, peering into my car at the grocery bags, "my mom sent me over. She says you need to share those groceries with the community. It's part of the new HOA emergency preparedness program." I stared at him for a moment, processing what he just said. "I'm sorry, what now?" The emergency preparedness program. Everyone's supposed to contribute food to the community stockpile. Mom says since you probably get your groceries for free anyway. He gestured vaguely at me in a way that made my blood pressure spike. "You should donate them to families who actually pay full price." The racism was subtle, but unmistakable. The implication that because I'm black, I must be on government assistance in free groceries, not worthy of the same respect as other homeowners who actually pay full price. I dealt with this type of coded language my entire career, but experiencing it in my own neighborhood, from the son of the woman who collected my HOA dues every month, hit differently. "Tyler," I said, keeping my voice level, "I paid for these groceries with my own money. They're for my family's dinner. Now please move so I can park." His face shifted, the fake politeness dropping away. "Look, we know you people stick together, but this is a white neighborhood with white neighborhood rules. You're going to give us those groceries, or there's going to be a problem." That's when I saw her. Jonna Morrison was standing on her front porch directly across the street, arms crossed, watching the entire interaction. She was a woman in her mid-50s, always impeccably dressed, with a kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She'd been HOA president for 8 years, running unopposed every election because, frankly, most people were too busy with their actual lives to care about homeowner politics. I got out of my car. "Tyler, I'm going to ask you one more time to move. This is my property. These are my groceries, and I'm going home to my family." That's when Tyler pulled out his phone and started recording. "Mom," he yelled across the street. "He's threatening me. The black guy is threatening me. I knew exactly what was happening. I'd seen this playbook before: create a confrontation, escalate it, then play victim while recording only the reaction, not the instigation. But knowing the game doesn't make it less infuriating. When you're the target, Jonna Morrison was already on her phone, and I could hear her voice carry across the evening air. 911? Yes, I need police immediately. There's a threatening black man in our neighborhood. He's aggressive and appears to be under the influence of something. My son is scared for his life. Under the influence, threatening, all the buzzwords designed to get cops to show up ready for confrontation. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was calling the police on a police commander. But Jonna Morrison had no way of knowing what I did for a living. To her, I was just another blackface that didn't belong in her white neighborhood. Within 4 minutes impressive response time to patrol cars pulled into our street. I recognized both officers immediately, Officer Rodriguez and Officer Chen. Both solid cops from my district. Their faces went through a range of emotions. When they saw me, confusion, recognition, then professional embarrassment. Commander Thompson, Rodriguez said carefully, stepping out of his patrol car, "We received a call about a disturbance." Jonna Morrison came marching across the street, Tyler trailing behind her, still recording. "Officers, thank God you're here. This man has been threatening my son, trying to steal from neighborhood families. He's clearly on drugs or something, officer." Chen looked at me, then at the grocery bags in my car, then back at Jonna Morrison. You could see him trying to piece together how his commanding officer ended up being the subject of a 911 call in his own neighborhood. "Ma'am," Chen said diplomatically, "can you explain exactly what happened?" "My son was simply informing this man about our community emergency preparedness program, and he became violent and aggressive. He refused to cooperate with community safety measures and started making threats. I watched Officer Rodriguez struggle with the situation. Here was his boss being accused of criminal behavior by a white woman in an affluent neighborhood. The politics were delicate, the optics were terrible, and the whole thing was being recorded by Tyler, who was live streaming on Instagram. Tyler," I said, addressing the son directly while looking at the officers, "please tell these officers exactly what you asked me to do." Tyler glanced at his mother, then at his phone, still recording. "I asked him to donate his groceries to the Community Emergency Fund. It's a new HOA rule. And when I refused to give you groceries that I purchased for my family's dinner," I continued, "what did you say to me?" Another glance at his mother. "I told him about the neighborhood rules." "What specifically did you say about the neighborhood rules, Tyler?" The kid's confidence was starting to waver. Officer Rodriguez was taking notes, and I could see him connecting the dots. This wasn't a criminal situation, this was a civil rights situation. And it was happening to his commanding officer. Jonna Morrison stepped forward. "Officers, I don't appreciate the tone of this interrogation. We called you here because this man was threatening my son. Are you going to arrest him or not?" That's when Officer Chen made a decision that would change everything. "Ma'am, we're going to need to see some identification from everyone involved. And we're going to take separate statements." "Identification?" Jonna's voice pitched higher. "I live here. I'm the HOA president. I shouldn't need to show you identification in my own neighborhood. Standard procedure, ma'am." As Officer Rodriguez approached me for my statement, Jonna Morrison made a phone call. I could only hear fragments, but what I caught chilled me. "We have a problem. The plan isn't working. He's not just some random black guy. We need to accelerate the timeline." 20 minutes later, after statements were taken and Tyler's recording was reviewed, both officers apologized to me privately and informed Jonna Morrison that no crime had been committed. But as they were leaving, Officer Rodriguez pulled me aside. "Commander, there's something else you should know. This is the third call we've gotten from this neighborhood in the past month, all involving complaints about the same house." "What house?" "Yours, sir. Someone's been filing noise complaints, suspicious activity reports, even a false burglary alarm that sent 6 units here last week when you were out of town." That's when it clicked. This wasn't random racism from an entitled HOA president. This was systematic harassment designed to build a paper trail. But why? What could Jonna Morrison possibly gain from driving me out of the neighborhood? I was about to find out that groceries were just the beginning. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept replaying the confrontation, analyzing every word, every gesture, trying to understand what I was really dealing with. Sarah found me at 2 a.m. sitting in our kitchen, still in my uniform, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. "Marcus, talk to me," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "What's really bothering you? You've dealt with racist jerks before." She was right. In 23 years of police work, I'd encountered every variety of bigotry imaginable. But this felt different, calculated. It's not just the racism, Sarah. There's something else going on. This was too orchestrated, too convenient. The next morning, I did what any good investigator does. I started digging. I pulled the calls for service reports for our address over the past 6 months. What I found made my stomach turn. 17 calls, 17 separate complaints about our house, all filed by different residents. But when I cross-referenced the phone numbers, they all trace back to the same 3 households: the Morrisons, the Hendersons, and the Patels. But here's what really caught my attention: the timing. The calls had started exactly 3 weeks after I'd filed a formal request with the HOA for financial records. As a homeowner, I was entitled to review how our association fees were being spent, especially since they'd increased 40% over the past 2 years with little explanation. I made the request after noticing some irregularities. Our community center had supposedly undergone a $200,000 renovation, but driving past it every day, I couldn't see the $100,000 worth of improvements. The new playground equipment John M. Morrison had announced in the newsletter looked suspiciously identical to the old equipment, just rearranged. And the emergency road repairs that cost us $150,000. Our streets looked exactly the same. My fraud investigator instincts were screaming that something was wrong. So I'd submitted the paperwork requesting a full financial audit of HOA expenditures for the past 3 years. John M. Morrison had initially ignored the request, then delayed it, claiming the records were being reorganized by our accounting firm. Now, 3 weeks later, I was suddenly the neighborhood's most complained about resident. I called my attorney, David Kim, a sharp civil rights lawyer I'd worked with on several police misconduct cases. David had a reputation for being thorough, aggressive, and completely unintimidated by powerful people who thought their money or position made them untouchable. "Marcus, this sounds like retaliation," David said after I briefed him on the situation. "You exercise your legal right to review HOA finances, and suddenly you're being harassed out of your neighborhood. We need to document everything and file a federal civil rights complaint." "It's not just about civil rights anymore, David. I think there's criminal fraud involved. I want to open a parallel investigation through my department." That afternoon, I quietly reached out to Detective Lisa Park from our financial crimes unit. Lisa had been working fraud cases for 12 years and had a gift for following money trails that would make forensic accountants jealous. "Commander, I'll need to recuse you from any official investigation due to the conflict of interest," Lisa said. "But nothing stops me from conducting preliminary inquiries into potential HOA fraud in the city. If Brookhaven Estates is dirty, there might be other associations using the same schemes." What Lisa discovered over the next week was staggering. Brookhaven Estates wasn't just mismanaging money, they were running a sophisticated embezzlement operation. John M. Morrison had created fake vendor contracts with companies that existed only on paper. The $200,000 community center renovation, the money went to Morrison Maintenance Solutions, a company registered to Jeanette's husband's cousin. The playground equipment, purchased from Family Fun Installations, owned by Tyler Morrison, Jeanette's 19-year-old son, who was somehow a licensed playground contractor, despite being a college sophomore. But the real smoking gun came when Lisa accessed the HOA's banking records through a financial crimes warrant. Over the past 3 years, nearly $800,000 in homeowner fees had been diverted through these fake companies, with the money ultimately flowing back to accounts controlled by John M. Morrison and to other HOA board members. They weren't just stealing from homeowners, they were stealing from families, retirees, young couples who'd saved everything for their first house. People like Marcus and Angela Patel, the young Indian American couple who lived the streets over and worked double shifts as medical residents to afford their HOA fees. People like Robert and Helen Henderson, the elderly couple who downsized to our neighborhood to be closer to their grandchildren and were living on a fixed retirement income. The cruelest part? John M. Morrison has specifically targeted minority homeowners with harassment campaigns. When they got curious about HOA finances, Detective Park found evidence of similar patterns directed at the Patel family and a black military family. Hood Moved out 6 months earlier after constant violations and complaints. Commander, Detective Park said during our secret meeting at a coffee shop across town. This goes deeper than fraud. Morrison has been systematically using fear and intimidation to silence homeowners who might expose her scheme. What happened to you wasn't random. You're a cop with fraud investigation experience. You were the biggest threat to her operation. That's when we discovered the surveillance footage. David Kim had filed a discovery request as part of our civil rights complaint, demanding all security footage from the community center and common areas. What we received was enlightening, but what we didn't receive was even more telling. The footage from the night of the grocery incident was mysteriously corrupted. The cameras that should have captured Tyler blocking my driveway had suffered technical malfunctions. But David's team was thorough. They canvassed the neighborhood and found that 3 other houses had security systems that captured portions of the street. Mrs. Chen, an elderly widow who lived next to the community center, had a Ring doorbell system that captured everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. The footage showed Tyler Morrison receiving explicit instructions from his mother. Before approaching my car, it captured John Morrison making not 1, but 3 phone calls during the incident. The 911 call we knew about, plus the other calls that happened before Tyler even confronted me. Most damaging of all, it recorded a conversation between Jonna and Tyler that happened after the police left. Did you get him rattled? Jonna asked her son. Yeah, but Mom, he didn't seem scared. He seemed, I don't know, like he knew what he was doing. We'll escalate things. The Peterson family is already talking about the noise complaints. If we can get 2 more families to file formal complaints with the city, we can trigger a nuisance investigation. What if that doesn't work? Then we move to phase 2. The Patels didn't fight back when we accused them of running an illegal business from their home. This guy might be different, but everyone has pressure points. Phase 2. There was a phase 2. Detective Park and I spent the next several days mapping out what phase 2 might look like. We didn't have to wait long to find out. On Thursday morning, I received an official notice from the city's code enforcement division. Someone had filed a complaint claiming that I was operating an illegal surveillance business from my home, violating zoning laws and potentially surveilling neighbors without consent. The complaint included photographs of my house taken with a telephoto lens, showing my home security system and claiming it was commercial-grade equipment being used for profit. The photos were date-stamped and GPS tagged. They'd been taken from John M. Morrison's backyard. Friday brought another escalation. The state's Child Protective Services received an anonymous tip that Emma, my 8-year-old daughter, was being exposed to dangerous police materials in our home, including firearms and disturbing crime scene photographs. The complaint specifically mentioned that Emma had access to weapons training materials and was being psychologically damaged by exposure to her father's violent police work. Sarah called me at work, crying, "Marcus, they want to inspect our house. They want to interview Emma at school." What kind of people use a child as a weapon? The kind of people who had already stolen $800,000 and would do anything to avoid prison. That evening, David Kim called with news that would change everything. "Marcus, we got a break. Remember Tyler's Instagram live stream from the grocery incident? He didn't just record your confrontation, he accidentally left the stream running for another 20 minutes. The audio captured a conversation between him and his mother. That's going to blow this case wide open." What did they say? John M. Morrison explicitly discusses eliminating the Thompson problem and mentions that the money trail leads back to U.S. if he keeps digging. She also references something called the network. Apparently they've been running similar scams in at least for other Atlanta suburbs. The network. We weren't dealing with just a corrupt HOA president anymore. This was organized crime. And they'd made the mistake of targeting a police commander who specialized in taking down exactly these kinds of operations. But as I hung up the phone, I realized something that made my blood run cold. If John M. Morrison was part of a larger network, and if they were willing to weaponize Child Protective Services against my family, then they had resources and connections I hadn't anticipated. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was war, and they just declared in on the wrong family. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta had seen its share of dramatic cases, but the civil rights lawsuit Thompson v. Morrison at Brookhaven Estates HOA was drawing unusual attention. Media trucks lined Ted Turner Drive, and the gallery was packed with residents from not just Brookhaven Estates, but for other Atlanta suburbs where Detective Park had uncovered similar fraud schemes. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to David Kim, watching Jonna Morrison across the aisle. She looked different than she had during our neighborhood confrontations, professional, composed, surrounded by 3 high-priced attorneys from Kellner, Wade and Associates, one of Atlanta's most prestigious firms, the woman who had orchestrated a harassment campaign against my family now projected an image of respectability and wounded innocence. Judge Patricia Williams, a no-nonsense federal judge with 30 years of experience, called the courtroom to order. This case presents allegations of civil rights violations, housing discrimination, and conspiracy to intimidate. She announced, "Mr. Kim, you may proceed with your opening statement." David stood, commanding the room's attention. "Your Honor, this case is about power, prejudice, and the lengths to which corrupt individuals will go to protect their criminal enterprise." Commander Marcus Thompson didn't just experience racism in his neighborhood. He uncovered a systematic scheme to defraud homeowners of nearly $1 million, while targeting minority families with harassment designed to silence them permanently. The defense attorney, Margaret Kellner herself, countered with a different narrative. "Your Honor, my client Jonna Morrison is a dedicated community volunteer who has served as HOA president for 8 years without compensation." Commander Thompson has weaponized his position in law enforcement to launch a vindictive attack against a neighbor who simply asked him to follow community guidelines. The first week of testimony established the basic facts: the grocery incident, the harassment campaign, the false CPS complaint. But David had structured our case to build toward the explosive evidence we discovered. He wanted the jury to understand the human cost before revealing the criminal conspiracy. Sarah testified about the impact on our family, her voice steady, but her hands trembling as she described Emma asking why the mean lady wanted to take her away from us. Mrs. Patel from down the street testified about receiving similar harassment after questioning why their HOA fees had increased 40% in 1 year. James Peterson, the black military veteran who moved out of Brookhaven Estates, testified about constant violation notices for infractions that white neighbors committed without consequence, but it was Tyler Morrison's testimony that provided the first major surprise. David had subpoenaed Tyler as a hostile witness, and the 19-year-old college student clearly didn't want to be there. Under oath, he admitted to blocking my driveway and demanding my groceries, but he claimed it was just a prank that got out of hand. "Tyler," David said, pacing in front of the witness stand, "when you demanded Commander Thompson's groceries, you mentioned that he probably got them for free anyway. What did you mean by that?" "I don't remember saying that. Let me refresh your memory." David activated the courtroom's video system and played the audio from Tyler's Instagram live stream. The courtroom heard Tyler's voice clearly. "Mom says since you probably get your groceries for free anyway, you should donate them to families who actually pay full price." Tyler's face reddened. I was just repeating what my mom said." "And what did your mother mean when she said Commander Thompson probably got his groceries for free anyway?" Tyler glanced at his mother's attorney, who objected. But Judge Williams overruled. "Answer the question, Mr. Morrison. She said black people get food stamps and stuff, so it wasn't really his money." The courtroom stirred. David pressed forward. "Tyler, after the police left that night, did you have a conversation with your mother about what happened?" "I don't really remember." David played another audio clip from the stream that Tyler had forgotten was still running. Jonna Morrison's voice discussing Phase 2 and eliminating the Thompson problem. "Tyler, what is Phase 2? The kid was sweating now. "I don't know what that means." "Did your mother ever discuss filing false reports about the Thompson family?" Before Tyler could answer, something extraordinary happened. He broke down completely, sobbing on the witness stand. "I'm sorry," he said, looking directly at me. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt your little girl. When Mom filed that CPS report, I told her it was too far, but she said we weren't too deep to stop now." The courtroom exploded. Jonna Morrison was whispering furiously with her attorneys while Tyler continued. She said, "If Mr. Thompson kept investigating the HOA money, we'd all go to prison. She made me help with the fake companies, made me pretend to be a playground contractor. I just wanted her to stop. But she said the other HOA presidents were depending on us to make this work." Judge Williams called for order, but the damage was done. Tyler Morrison had just confessed to federal fraud and implicated his mother in a conspiracy. that extended beyond Brookhaven Estates. During the lunch break, Detective Park approached me in the hallway. "Commander, we need to talk." Tyler's testimony about other HOA presidents just corroborated something we discovered this morning. She handed me a folder. "We executed a search warrant on John M. Morrison's house at 6 a.m. We found records of the entire Network 7 suburban HOA developments, all using the same fake vendor scheme. The total fraud is over $3 million. But the real bombshell came when court resumed that afternoon. David called Detective Park as a witness and introduced the evidence seized from John M. Morrison's home. Among the documents was a detailed plan called Operation Suburban Shield, which laid out strategies for targeting problematic homeowners who might expose HOA fraud. The plan specifically identified minority homeowners, law enforcement personnel, and financial professionals as high-risk residents who should be managed through systematic pressure campaigns. It included template forms for filing false complaints, scripts for creating harassment scenarios, and even contact information for corrupt CPS caseworkers who would expedite investigations against targeted families. Detective Park, David said, "Did you find evidence that this plan was implemented in other neighborhoods?" "Yes, sir. We found similar harassment campaigns against a FBI agent in Dunwoody, an IRS investigator in Sandy Springs, and a bank fraud specialist in Roswell, all minority homeowners, all targeted after they began asking questions about HOA finances." Margaret Kellner objected strenuously, claiming the evidence was prejudicial, but Judge Williams allowed it all in. The jury was seeing the full scope of what we were dealing with, not just local corruption, but organized crime with racist targeting strategies. The most dramatic moment came when David called John M. Morrison to the stand. She had no choice but to testify, and she came out swinging, claiming she was being persecuted by a vindictive police commander who couldn't accept being told to follow neighborhood rules. "Mrs. Morrison," David said calmly, "are you familiar with Morrison Maintenance Solutions? It's a legitimate contracting business, registered to your husband's cousin, correct?" "I believe so. A cousin who lives in Oregon and has never set foot in Georgia." Jeanette's composure cracked slightly. "I don't see how that's relevant." David introduced bank records showing that Morrison Maintenance Solutions had received $100, zero for community center renovations, but had never purchased any materials or hired any workers. The money had been transferred directly to John M. Morrison's personal account within 48 hours. "Mrs. Morrison, can you explain why renovation money went directly to your personal bank account?" "I was managing the project personally to ensure quality control." "And can you show us receipts for materials purchased or workers hired for this $100,000 renovation?" Silence. "Mrs. Morrison, do you recognize this document?" David showed her a copy of Operation Suburban Shield with her signature at the bottom. "I've never seen that before. This document was found in your home office, in a file cabinet that, according to your husband's testimony, only you have access to. It contains detailed plans for harassing Commander Thompson's family, including the full CPS report. Are you saying someone else placed this in your personal files?" John M. Morrison's attorney was objecting frantically, but the damage was mounting. David continued methodically dismantling her credibility, introducing evidence of fake contracts, forged invoices, and harassment campaigns spanning multiple neighborhoods. Then came the final surprise that nobody saw coming. As David was concluding his cross-examination, John M. Morrison suddenly stood up and pointed at me. "He threatened my family," she screamed. "He said if I didn't stop investigating his drug dealing, he planned evidence in my house." The courtroom went silent. Drug dealing. This was completely new, and it wasn't in any of the court filings or testimony. Judge Williams called for order, but John M. Morrison continued. "He's been selling drugs out of his house for months. The whole harassment story is just his cover-up. I have proof." She reached into her purse and pulled out what appeared to be surveillance photos, trying to hand them to her attorney. But as she did, something else fell out of her purse and clattered across the floor, a small digital recorder. David moved quickly. "Your Honor, I request that recording device be secured as evidence." John M. Morrison lunged for the recorder, but a U.S. Marshal was faster. As chaos erupted in the courtroom, Judge Williams called for an immediate recess. What that recorder contained would expose a conspiracy so much deeper and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. John M. Morrison hadn't just been embezzling HOA funds and targeting minority homeowners. She'd been recording every conversation, every phone call, every meeting with her co-conspirators for over 2 years, and she just accidentally handed us evidence that would bring down corrupt officials in 7 cities, implicate a sitting city councilman, and reveal connections to a drug money laundering operation that had nothing to do with me, but everything to do with why Jonna Morrison was so desperate to drive law enforcement out of her neighborhood. As the marshal secured the recorder and Jonna Morrison was handcuffed for contempt of court, I realized this case was about to become something none of us had anticipated. We weren't just fighting for our civil rights anymore. We'd stumbled onto the biggest corruption scandal in Atlanta's history. The digital recorder that fell from Jonna Morrison's purse contained 127 audio files, spanning 18 months. What Detective Park and the FBI discovered on those recordings would make headlines across the country and ultimately bring down corrupt officials in 7 Atlanta suburbs. But first, we had to finish the civil rights trial. Judge Williams reconvened court 3 days later, after federal investigators had reviewed the most relevant recordings. The atmosphere was electric. Word had leaked about the recorder, and the gallery was packed with reporters, federal agents, and homeowners from affected communities. David Kim addressed the jury with recordings that painted a picture of systematic corruption beyond anything we'd originally imagined. Jonna Morrison hadn't just been stealing HOA funds. She'd been operating a money laundering scheme for a drug trafficking organization led by her brother-in-law, using fake HOA contracts to clean drug money. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, David said, playing one of the recordings, this is Jonna Morrison speaking to her co-conspirator, City Councilman Robert Hayes, 3 days after the grocery incident. The courtroom heard Jonette's voice clearly. The cop is getting too close. We need to accelerate the plan to get him out of the neighborhood. Hayes, can your guys CPS push harder on the child endangerment angle? What about the drug planting operation we discussed? Hayes responded, we could have narcotics found during a search of his house. Too risky. He's too high profile. But if we can get him discredited through the harassment campaign, no one will believe him when he tries to expose the money laundering. The jury looked horrified. This wasn't just civil rights violations, this was conspiracy to frame a police commander with false drug charges to protect a criminal enterprise. But the most shocking recording came next. David played a conversation between Jonna Morrison and someone identified only as Vincent. Vincent, we have a problem, Jonette's voice said. The black cop in Brookhaven is asking too many questions about the financials. Handle it like we did with the FBI agent in Dunwoody, Vincent replied. Plant drugs, tip off internal affairs, create enough chaos to discredit him. That FBI agent moved away before we had to go that far. Then maybe this cop needs a more permanent solution. I know people who can make problems disappear permanently. The courtroom went dead silent. Vincent, who investigators later identified as Vincent Torino, a known associate of the Lucchese crime family, was discussing having me killed to protect their operation. Detective Park testified that the recordings revealed a network spanning 7 whole communities, with over $12 million in drug money laundered through fake home improvement contracts. The racist harassment campaigns weren't just about silencing critics. They were specifically designed to drive out law enforcement professionals and financial experts who might recognize money laundering patterns. Commander Thompson wasn't targeted because he was black, Detective Park explained. He was targeted because he was a black police commander with fraud investigation experience, living in a neighborhood being used to launder drug money. His race made him easier to harass without generating sympathy, and his profession made him too dangerous to ignore. The defense tried desperately to claim Jonna Morrison was being coerced by Vincent Torino and City Councilman Hayes, but the recordings made clear she was a willing participant who often initiated the most extreme harassment strategies. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict to $0.3 million in damages for civil rights violations, plus punitive damages that brought the total award to $4.8 million. Judge Williams ruled that the harassment campaign constituted a systematic and malicious violation of our constitutional rights, with clear intent to cause maximum psychological harm to the plaintiff's family. But the civil trial was just the beginning. The federal criminal investigation that followed became known as Operation Suburban Shield after Jonna Morrison's harassment manual. FBI raids across 7 Atlanta suburbs led to 34 arrests, including Jonna Morrison, City Councilman Hayes, 3 other HOA presidents, the CPS caseworkers, and Vincent Torino himself. The money laundering scheme was staggering in its scope. Over 4 years, the network had used fake HOA contracts to clean $47 million in drug proceeds, with the dirty money flowing through home improvement companies that existed only on paper. Homeowners in affected communities had been unknowingly paying inflated HOA fees to subsidize organized crime. Jean M. Morrison ultimately pled guilty to money laundering, conspiracy, civil rights violations, and racketeering charges. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $12 million in restitution. Her son Tyler, who cooperated fully with investigators, received probation and community service. City Councilman Hayes got 22 years. Vincent Torino, whose threats against my family elevated the charges to domestic terrorism, received life in prison. But here's the twist that none of us saw coming. 3 months after the criminal trials concluded, I received a call from FBI Special Agent Maria Santos. She'd been investigating a completely separate case involving corruption in the Atlanta Police Department, which she discovered something that connected to our whole case. Commander Thompson, we need to meet. I found recordings that suggest the corruption in your neighborhood case goes higher than we thought. We met at a secure FBI facility in downtown Atlanta, where Agent Santos played me a recording that made my blood run cold. It was a conversation between Vincent Torino and someone identified as the captain, discussing the need to neutralize the investigation into HOA money laundering. The captain was discussing specific details about internal police investigations that only someone with high-level access would know. He knew about my role in the financial crimes unit, my connection to Detective Park's investigation,